Mr. Yoder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Holder, thank you for being here today. I know you've been on the Hill a few times in the last few months and have gotten to know many members of Congress well, so we know that you've got a lot of things to do, and we appreciate that you're here again this morning. Our top priority, at least my top priority in this committee, is to try to figure out ways to find savings to try to get this budget back in balance. I'm a new member in Congress. Several of us are new members here, and many Americans are very concerned about the spending in the federal government and asking us consistently when we go back for town halls, what are you doing to root out waste, right? It should be a goal of everybody in the city is how do we find wasteful programs? How do we eliminate programs that may be ineffective? And how do we get the budget back in balance? I noticed that you were able to reduce your budget from $27.2 billion to $27.1 billion, a 0.4% reduction, which is notable, but certainly not going to get the job done that we need to try to balance the federal budget. If we did a 0.4% across-the-board cut, we wouldn't really get very far. We borrow about $4 billion a day, by some estimates $40,000 a second, and so it'd be interesting to note how much we borrow just in the discussion of your budget, and so it's pretty easy to see how we go backwards pretty quickly. And so as I do my job, and as my colleagues, we do our jobs, trying to find where to reduce spending, the things that come to my mind first are programs or departments in which I have concerns about the effectiveness of the management of the department. And I'm sure you would do the same thing if you were sitting on our table. You would find which managers are least effective and figure out a way to eliminate programs. And it's no secret that many members of Congress are very concerned about some of the programs that you've engaged in, particularly one that has caused you to spend a lot of time on the Hill, and that's the Fast and Furious program. And I note that if we were here several years ago, that might have been a program we could have eliminated to save money, as that one clearly is one that I think you've stated that it's not something you knew anything about, something that you don't support. And so I guess as we go through this dialogue about finding ways to reduce programs and save money, what are other programs that you're not aware of that you could find out about that might be also causing similar mischief or being unaccountable to you that you could do a better job in finding them more accountable? That's the first thought in terms of how this relates to our job here to save money. The second thing, though, is I'm troubled, and I have a confidence issue, Mr. General, in the leadership and the management of the department because of your response to this one particular incident. I don't have a lot of experience following you every day related to every program, but this has gotten enough attention, enough highlight. I've watched lots of the testimony, and as a new member, I go home and people say, what are you doing to hold the administration accountable? In particular, people ask me, and you need to be aware that many people ask us what we're doing to hold the Department of Justice accountable for that horrible tragedy. And so I guess help me gain confidence, because I've been very concerned that the response from the agency has been, one, we didn't know about it, so how could I be accountable? I didn't know it was happening, which seems to be a little bit of a pretty bad effort to not take responsibility. I mean, you're the manager of the department. And then two, I've been also troubled that you haven't held others accountable for the incidents. And I know you've had a lot of questions on this. I'm not going to ask a unique question you haven't had a chance to answer, but I'd like to hear how I explain to my constituents who say, we sent you up there to be a voice, to be a strong voice for our district, and this general, he's not taking accountability for his own departments. You're supposed to be cutting spending. Why aren't you cutting some of his programs? And so I'm trying to find things that might be similar to cut here, and also trying to find out how I can be responsive to my constituents who say that we're not doing a tough enough job of holding you accountable for what appears to be a failure of leadership.
Okay. Let me first deal with the question of reductions. I mean, our budget proposes, I guess, $647 million in savings and efficiencies, and a 0.4 reduction might not seem significant, except when you take into account, among other things, the rising costs that we have to deal with regard to the Bureau of Prisons, where we are still, even with the budget we have proposed, have about a 39-40% overcrowding rate that concerns me a great deal with regard to the safety of the guards who are there, safety of the prisoners as well. So that when we have these costs that are going up and about which we have little or no control, we are still at the point where we are keeping the budget flat. So in essence, we are we're doing, I think, an efficient job there. My responsibility as Attorney General is to try to identify those areas where, given the budget situation that our nation is facing, where we can come up with budget cuts. We've saved, $214 million in operational costs as we've reduced office space, rent costs, better pricing on technology, contracts. We have smarter travel regulations that are in place. These are all the little things that kind of add up. And so we're trying to be responsible, and that, I think, you could say you could share with your constituents. When it comes to Fast and Furious, I think that what I'd say is that I've not shied away from the fact that I'm ultimately responsible for everything that happens in the United States Department of Justice. But one has to look at what was my response to Fast and Furious once it came to my attention. I ordered that the practices that were involved in that unfortunate operation be stopped. I ordered that an investigation occur. Personnel changes have been made. Reforms have been put in place at ATF. And we will see from the Inspector General investigation that I ordered, we'll have a more fulsome look at exactly what happened in Fast and Furious, and I'm prepared to take other actions as well, though I understand my responsibility and will not shy from it to take action before the Inspector General finishes her report if I find a basis for that.
Mr. General, if I might interject, do you believe the program was a mistake?
I think that it was a good attempt. It was a bad attempt at trying to deal with a very pernicious problem where guns are flowing from the United States to Mexico. It was, in its execution, in its conception, was fundamentally flawed. But I understand what they were trying to do, but they just did it extremely, extremely poorly.
And if you had a chance to do it over again, would you continue the program? Would you have eliminated it before they proceeded?
I certainly would have modified the program. I mean, allowing guns to walk is simply a process, a procedure that just does not make sense. It's bad law enforcement, and I think that is at the heart of the problem with regard to Fast and Furious. On the other hand, coming up with ways in which we stop the flow of guns from the United States to Mexico, I think we need to be aggressive, we need to be creative, and we need to help our Mexican counterparts to the extent that we can.
The other challenge that I think while we're on this issue, I just note in the budget and why this is relevant is there is language in the budget that was in the appropriations bill that passed that the Department of Justice is asking to be stricken. And that's on page 811 of the budget, section 219, and that language says that none of the funds made available under this act may be used by a federal law enforcement officer to facilitate the transfer of an operable firearm to an individual if the federal law enforcement officer knows or suspects that the individual is an agent of a drug cartel, unless law enforcement personnel of the United States continuously monitor or control the firearm at all times. And one question I have is why the administration wants to eliminate that language.
As I understand, that's an amendment that was put in by Senator Cornyn.
99-0 in the Senate.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent with our policy. I'm not sure that we are opposing it. To the extent we are opposing it, I get it. Yeah, to the extent we are opposing it, it is only because that's already the policy that we use. So it is something that's unnecessary. So that would be the basis for any opposition that we had.
Do you understand why members on the Hill may not believe you're following the policy that you have internally, considering what just happened?
Frankly, no, I don't understand that. Given the action that I have taken, there's a certain amount of distrust. I get that. There's a certain amount of partisan wrangling that's going on. But given the serious nature of this controversy, it would be my hope that we could have, as frankly we're having here, this is very interesting. I'm having a conversation about Fast and Furious in a very appropriate, neutral, detached way, which is fundamentally different from my experiences in other committees. And this is almost, I won't say pleasant, but it's different.
Am I not doing my job enough here? I'm just kidding. Sure, I'd be happy to yield.
I was unaware that this program, Operation Wide Receiver, which was part of Fast and Furious, started in 2006 and was continued into 2007. And some of the most serious things that happened were in the midst of these operations, Attorney General Michael Mukasey received a briefing paper on November 16, 2007, in preparation for a meeting with the Mexican Attorney General. It stated that the ATF would like to expand the possibility of such joint investigations and controlled deliveries. I think it's important for the American people to understand that this started in the previous administration, and that the ATF, was not candid with the leaders in the previous administration about this program. In fact, it was stopped at one point, but they went ahead and kept making sales to these people in order to try to get a bigger fish. So I just wanted to point that out so we could have a fair description of what's happened here.
And so I guess into the gentleman's point, the point I'm getting at is that back in 2006, there was awareness these things were going on, and yet we continued to fund the program. And so as a new member on appropriations, I'm saying when we're doing our work here, trying to figure out where to solve this horrific national debt crisis we're facing, well, first of all, let's start with stopping funding programs like this that it looks like there's bipartisan agreement are bad programs that have put you in a horrible light. And many of us, myself included, have lost confidence. I'm being frank with you, sir. We've lost confidence in the management of the department. And the only thing I would say regarding your response that gives me trouble still is there is a sense that the concerns that are being raised on the Hill are illegitimate. This language was put in with a 99-0. I'm just saying that's how it appears to me, sir, that the language that we put in at 99-0 in the Senate, rather than say, I could understand, given what happened, why members on the Hill would want some additional language in there. Rather, it's, well, that's redundant, and I don't know why you're concerned about that. And I just want to tell you, as someone who's observed these hearings, I think that there's been a disservice to your argument in that you haven't embraced the rationale that many people in our districts, our constituents, are upset. And they come to us and say, why are you letting this continue? And so you have to understand, this isn't just something that got dreamt up in an office for a congressman. This is coming from real Americans who are outraged that their federal government is allowing this to happen. And so to the extent that there's any dismissiveness of this from the Department of Justice, it fuels the rage and drives the concern greater. It continues it on. And so my advice is if you want to continue to make your other programs effective, is to find a way to better acknowledge these things. And I would just believe removing language that was passed 99-0 that just gives Congress a level of comfort. Clearly you weren't following your own policies. That's admitted, because guns were being given to folks and they weren't being monitored. That's I think a conceded fact. That this language is just something that gives Congress more faith that they're doing their part to try to be engaged in oversight and making sure dollars are spent effectively. And so I just caution you, sir, by removing things like this, it lends credence to my belief that there is a wanton disregard for the seriousness of what's occurred.
If the gentleman would yield for 1 second. If the gentleman would yield for 1 second.
Could I have the general respond to my point?
Sure. Please don't take my comments here or any comments that I have made in any of the 6 or 7 hearings I've had or occasions to talk about this before other committees as questioning the legitimacy of the questions that have been raised. I mean, those are very legitimate questions that you are raising and others in other settings have raised. That was a fundamentally flawed program, fundamentally flawed. And I think that I can actually agree with some of my harshest critics that there are legitimate issues that need to be explored with regard to the way in which Fast and Furious was carried out. I have never tried to defend the program. What has kind of bothered me is that we have taken something that we actually share a concern, and it has gone from that and mushroomed into the political sphere, where people ask for resignations, where I'm threatened with contempt or something like that, in spite of the fact that we're trying to provide documents. There's a whole variety of things that flow from that. But at its core, I tend to agree with you that the questions that you're asking today and the questions that other people have asked are legitimate ones. But I think one thing that also has to be understood is that once this was brought to my attention, I stopped it. In spite of what other attorneys general might have done with briefings that they got, when this Attorney General heard about these practices, I said to the men and women of the United States Department of Justice, to the field, to people at Maine Justice, this ain't going to be the way we conduct business. Stop it.
I have just a limited second here. I'd like to ask just one unrelated question, and we could probably do this all day, and I know you have felt like you've done it all day at certain times, so I'll move on. I just want to say the conversation you've had on the other side of the table regarding prison costs, and you mentioned that in your comments related to the increase in your budget. I'd encourage you to look at states like Kansas, where I'm from, that have shown some real progress in reducing prison costs through strong supportive reentry programs and really working to reduce recidivism rates. I think there's a real benefit there. I know you've mentioned that in your testimony. Kansas has a good model. There are other states that have good models, and I think that's a real area that you could focus on that really could be one of those pound-wise kind of appropriation angles that we might be able to engage with you on. And then the only other thing I wanted to highlight is a bill that I've co-sponsored with Patrick Meehan and Mr. Fatah and a couple others regarding veterans drug courts. It's called the Salute Act, and I might just highlight that, and that might be one way in which we might be able to reduce some prison costs and help some of our returning veterans with drug courts that might actually benefit them and benefit the bottom line on our expenditures.
I mean, I think the two approaches that you've talked about are actually ones that are very worthy of exploration. What Kansas has done, I saw a Pew study of what was done in Kansas, and the numbers are startling. They're really startling with the approaches that were taken. And I think it's really helpful that they come from, the studies that I've seen from Texas and from Kansas come from what are, I think, thought of as red states. People might be dismissive of what happened in New York, but I mean, when you see what's happening in Texas and in Kansas, I think that is something, I don't dismiss what happened in New York, but I think it's worthy of exploration. And I think the use of drug courts for veterans is something, given the nature of the service that these people have given to our country, that there is a special obligation, I think, that we have to deal with them. And I think that the substance abuse problems that so many of our returning veterans have, and then what that means for them in terms of involvement in the criminal justice system, that is something that I think we will support and try to work with you on. But I think that's a very good idea.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.